In 2001, a team of scientists rappelled down a cliff face in the middle of the Pacific Ocean at 11 o'clock at night, pointed a torch at a single dead-looking bush, and came face to face with an animal that the entire scientific world had agreed was extinct. Not probably extinct, not possibly extinct. Officially, completely. File closed, funding redirected, extinct. Dead for 80 years, gone from the earth. And yet there it was, moving around under that bush in the dark, alive, on a rock that barely exists, in the middle of an ocean that most planes fly over without anyone looking down. What they found that night did not just save a species. It cracked open one of the most uncomfortable questions in all of science. How many other things do we think are gone that are actually still out there, on ledges and in crevices and in places we have never thought to check with a torch? Let me take you to a piece of geography that should not exist. 20 kilometers southeast of Lord Howe Island, in the Tasman Sea between Australia and New Zealand, there's a rock that rises straight out of the ocean with absolutely no apology for what it is. It is called Ball's Pyramid. And when you see a photograph of it for the first time, your brain does a small, confused pause, because the proportions look wrong. It looks like someone drew a mountain and forgot to add the base. It looks like a mistake in the rendering. It is not a mistake. It is real. It has been there for 7 million years, and it is one of the most structurally improbable pieces of solid land on the surface of this planet. Here are the numbers. Ball's Pyramid rises 562 meters above sea level. That is nearly the height of the Shard in London. Its widest point is approximately 300 meters. Try to picture that. A rock that is 562 meters tall and only 300 meters wide at its broadest. If you drew it to scale on a piece of paper, it would look like you had gotten the proportions completely wrong. And yet the ocean just sits around it, waves crashing into the base from every direction, and the rock just stands there, vertical, ancient, and entirely indifferent to how impossible it looks. It is the remnant of a shield volcano that erupted from the ocean floor somewhere around 7 million years ago. What remains today is the volcanic plug, the hardened magma core that refused to erode at the same rate as everything around it. The ocean wore away the softer material over millions of years and left this needle of basalt jutting up from the Tasman Sea like the geological equivalent of a dare. There is no flat ground. There is no soil worth speaking of. There is no fresh water. There is no harbor, no beach, no shelf of rock at the base where a boat could tie up and a crew could take a breath. There is just vertical cliff face, meeting moving water with unpredictable ocean swells surging and retreating in pulses that can throw a small vessel against the rock before anyone on board has time to react. A British naval officer named Henry Ball discovered it in 1788 while doing survey work in the region. He named it after himself, which is the kind of confidence that explorers of that era had in abundance. Ball took one look at this vertical geological nightmare, wrote it down in his charts, and sailed away. For the next century and a half, almost nobody went near it. The reasons were not complicated. You cannot land a boat. You cannot stand anywhere. The walls go straight up from the waterline. The swells are unpredictable, and the whole structure radiates a kind of hostility that experienced sailors recognize and instinctively respect. Scientists knew it was there. They could see it on maps. But when you cannot reach a place, you tend to assume that nothing particularly interesting is happening there. That assumption, in the case of Ball's Pyramid, turned out to be one of the most consequential errors in the history of conservation biology. Getting to Ball's Pyramid is not merely difficult. It is the kind of difficult that makes experienced mountaineers and open water sailors have a quiet internal conversation about their priorities. The Tasman Sea in this region regularly produces swells exceeding 3 meters. There is nothing to break the current. Climbers and boat crews who have attempted the transfer from vessel to rock face, the moment where you jump from a moving boat onto a vertical cliff and start climbing before the swell comes back, have described it as one of the most psychologically terrifying things they have ever done. And these are people who do extremely hard things for enjoyment. The rock itself, once you are on it, is almost entirely vertical, with sections that overhang the water below. The basalt offers decent handholds when dry, but the proximity to the ocean means sections of the lower face are regularly soaked with spray. Wet basalt on the bottom of a 560-meter vertical drop above the Tasman Sea is an experience that most sensible people have never had to think about. Most early attempts to explore the pyramid were abandoned at the base. Boats would approach, crews would assess the situation, and collective wisdom would win over enthusiasm. Regulatory barriers added another layer. Lord Howe Island is Australian territory, and Ball's Pyramid falls under the same jurisdiction. Getting official permission to land, particularly for any scientific activity, required months of paperwork on top of the physical danger. The combination of inaccessibility, dangerous ocean conditions, and regulatory requirements meant that Ball's Pyramid entered the second half of the 20th century, having been seen by thousands of people from passing vessels and systematically visited by almost none of them. That changed in 1965 when 4 Australian climbers named David Roots, John Davis, Jack Pettigrew, and David Witham decided that the fact something had never been done was an invitation rather than a warning. They made it. The first recorded ascent of Ball's Pyramid was completed in 1965, and what they found at the top was almost nothing. No soil, no fresh water, no trees, no shelter, no obvious reason for any living thing to have made it there. Just rock, wind, and the Pacific stretching away in every direction. The summit view was extraordinary. The experience of getting there and getting back was one that required serious technical climbing skill and the kind of calm that most people do not have 560 meters above open ocean. But here's the thing the 1965 climbers could not fully investigate because they were focused on surviving the descent. Ball's Pyramid is not just a summit, it is a complex vertical landscape. There are ledges distributed across the face at multiple heights. There are crevices and overhangs and sheltered microenvironments that are meaningfully different from both the exposed summit and the wave-battered base. Some ledges accumulate enough wind-blown material to support plant growth. Some crevices retain moisture. Some sheltered spots on the southern and western faces are protected enough from salt spray and wind to create conditions that are genuinely different from anything else on the rock. Ball's Pyramid is not one environment. It is dozens of environments stacked vertically on top of each other, most of which had never been examined by anyone with a field notebook and a collecting jar. The 1965 climbers proved it was possible to reach the summit. They could not systematically document what was living in the crevices 2/3 of the way up a 560-meter cliff face in the middle of the Tasman Sea. That question sat unanswered for decades. While it sat unanswered, something had already happened on Lord Howe Island, 19 kilometers away, that would eventually send scientists scrambling back to Ball's Pyramid with very specific instructions about what to look for. Lord Howe Island had a stick insect. This sounds like the beginning of a trivial observation. It is not. The Dryococelus australis, commonly called the Lord Howe Island stick insect and given the unofficial nickname of the tree lobster, because it is enormous and has a slightly crustacean quality to its appearance, was one of the most remarkable insects on Earth. It grew to 15 centimeters in length. It was nocturnal, jet black, glossy, with a tubular body as thick as a finger. It had been described by naturalists since the 1800s. Lord Howe Island fishermen used it as bait regularly, which tells you something both about its abundance and about the very different relationship between humans and wildlife that existed before anyone understood what was about to happen. In 1918, a supply ship called the SS Macombo ran aground on Lord Howe Island. The ship was carrying black rats. The rats got off the ship. This is not a complicated story to follow. Rats found themselves on an island with abundant food, no mammalian predators of any kind, and slow-moving insects the size of a finger that had never once in their evolutionary history needed to develop any defensive behavior against a mammal, because there had never been a mammal to defend against. Within 2 years of the ship running aground, the Lord Howe Island stick insect was functionally gone from the island. Entomologists, searching in 1920, could not find a single specimen. By 1960, it had been formally declared extinct. Gone. Another entry on the long list of species eliminated by introduced predators on isolated island ecosystems. The tree lobster joined the dodo, the passenger pigeon, and close to 900 other species on a list that humans had a great deal to do with building. Except there were rumors. Lord Howe Island fishermen occasionally reported seeing something that matched the description of the tree lobster on Ball's Pyramid, that impossible rock 20 kilometers offshore. These reports were dismissed by the scientific community as anecdote, as wishful thinking, as the kind of story that grows in the retelling when you spend a lot of time at sea. The skepticism was reasonable. Scientists are trained to require evidence, and fishermen's stories about a creature that has been officially dead for decades are not evidence. In this case, the skepticism was wrong. The rumors persisted through the 1970s and into the 1980s without any formal investigation. Ball's Pyramid was too hard to reach. Permission was difficult to obtain. The scientific consensus was settled. The Lord Howe Island stick insect was extinct. The file was closed. But the rumors would not go away. And in 2001, a small team of researchers from the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service finally received permission to conduct a biological survey of Ball's Pyramid. The scientists were David Priddle and Nicholas Carlisle. Their official stated expectation was measured and careful, the kind of language scientists use when they do not want to commit to optimism and then be proven wrong in print. They said they hoped to document whatever invertebrate life might be present on the pyramid's accessible surfaces. What they actually hoped, quietly, was that they might find a shed exoskeleton, a dead specimen, a fragment of something biological that would confirm the rumors had some basis and justify a more thorough look. They did not expect to find living animals. They identified a specific ledge on the pyramid face, approximately 90 meters above sea level, sheltered beneath a single Melaleuca bush, a scrubby tea tree that manages to grow in nearly impossible conditions because it appears to have never received the information that it should not be able to. The ledge itself was narrow, with almost no soil. Getting to it required descending on ropes from above, positioning on a near-vertical face, and working carefully in conditions that did not reward careless movement. They found droppings. Fresh droppings. Large droppings. Consistent with a large insect, fresh enough to indicate recent activity on that ledge. The hands of an entomologist who has spent years working with a creature the world agrees is extinct will, reportedly, shake slightly when writing that observation into a field notebook. They came back that night with torches. Nocturnal insects are active at night. This is an obvious statement that becomes genuinely extraordinary when you are standing on a narrow ledge 90 meters above the Tasman Sea at 11 o'clock at night, holding a torch, waiting to see whether what comes out from under that bush is something that has been officially dead for 80 years. There were 24 of them. 24 Lord Howe Island stick insects alive, clustered beneath that single Melaleuca bush on a ledge on a rock that barely appears on maps in the middle of an ocean that most people never think about. The team stood there and looked at them. Think about what that moment actually is. These scientists are looking at an animal that the entire scientific community certified as extinct. They are looking at it 90 meters above open ocean on a volcanic sea stack. There is no framework for processing what it means to find something in a category that was supposed to be empty. The category was extinct. The animal was alive. 24 of them. Under a bush. On a ledge no one had ever thought to check with a torch. The team documented, photographed, and withdrew without collecting specimens. Population was too small, the situation too fragile, and the implications too significant to act without careful planning. What followed was 2 years of scientific assessment and genuine debate about whether removing any individuals from Ball's pyramid was justified. In 2003, with the entire known wild population of an entire species existing on a single precarious ledge beneath a single bush that any significant storm could destroy, 2 breeding pairs were carefully collected and transferred to the Australian mainland. One pair went to Melbourne Zoo. The keeper who established the captive breeding program was Patrick Honan. He spent months figuring out the precise conditions these insects required. The right humidity, the right temperature, the right food plants, the right light cycle, through a process of patient observation and what sounds like an extraordinary amount of stubborn persistence. One of the females, nicknamed Eve, fell gravely ill early in the program. She was nursed back to health by being hand-fed a slurry of ground-up tea tree leaves, sugar, and calcium. She survived. Stick insect females can produce offspring without a male, and Eve went on to lay 248 eggs. By 2008, the Melbourne Zoo captive population had grown past 900 individuals. By 2012, it had passed 11,000. By 2016, over 13,000 hatchlings had been produced across multiple generations. 6 institutions around the world are now involved in the conservation program, including the San Diego Zoo and, since 2025, Prague Zoo, which opened a dedicated Ball's pyramid exhibit to house and display the species for the first time in Europe. The tree lobster, the insect that had been dead since 1920, was alive in zoos on multiple continents. But the captive breeding program was always meant to be a bridge, not a destination. The goal was always reintroduction to Lord Howe Island, the place the species came from. And for that to be possible, the rats that had caused the extinction in the first place had to go first. That effort became what the Lord Howe Island Board officially describes as the largest rodent eradication program ever attempted on an inhabited island. In 2019, a coordinated operation deployed aerial baits, hand drops, and more than 20,000 ground stations across the island. It was an enormous, complicated, expensive, and deeply controversial undertaking. Many island residents initially opposed it. The concerns were real, about impacts on other wildlife, about the chemicals used, about whether it would actually work. The community debate was difficult. The project proceeded. Monitoring began for 2 years after the operation. In 2021, rats were still being detected in a small area. A rapid response was activated, including detection dogs. The wait began again. In July 2023, after a 2-week island-wide survey using more than 950 detection device checks, 140 tracking tunnels, 32 trail cameras, 300 wax tags and chew cards, and sweeps by detection dogs, with results verified by independent experts from the New Zealand Department of Conservation, Lord Howe Island was declared free of rats and mice. In November 2025, the Lord Howe Island Board published its final official report confirming the eradication project's success. The island, that had been invaded by rats in 1918 and had been living with that invasion ever since, was clean. The ecological recovery began almost immediately. Seabirds came back. Native land birds rebounded. A May 2026 research paper from a team at the University of Sydney documented that invertebrate populations in the leaf litter and forest floor had begun recovering in ways that had not been seen or measured in over a century. Beetles, snails, insects that the rats had been quietly eliminating for more than 100 years began to return to habitats they had been pushed out of. As of 2023, plans were formally being developed to reintroduce the Lord Howe Island stick insect first to Blackburn Island, a small islet in the Lord Howe Lagoon, as a test environment before the full reintroduction to the main island. Scientists are also running genetic research to determine the best breeding strategies for maintaining the genetic diversity that will give the wild population the best chance of surviving long term. There is one scientific complication worth noting because it shows how careful this process has to be. Studies from 2018 and 2024 identified bacterial pathogens in the captive breeding population, organisms like Serratia marcescens and Pseudomonas aeruginosa, that contributed to mortality in captivity and could potentially threaten wild populations if inadvertently transported during reintroduction. You cannot simply breed something back from near extinction and release it. You have to release it safely, cleanly, with full awareness of what it might carry. The science does not stop just because the headline victory has been won. Now here is the part that should stay with you long after this video ends. Ball's Pyramid is 562 meters tall. It has been systematically surveyed by scientists on exactly one occasion. 1. The 2001 expedition reached and examined the accessible sections of the pyramid's face, which represents a fraction of the total surface area of the entire structure. There are ledges higher up that have never been examined by anyone. There are crevice systems in the midsection of the pyramid that have never been explored. There are sheltered overhangs on the southern and western faces that have never had a torch shown into them by someone with a field notebook. The Lord Howe Island stick insect survived for 80 years on a ledge that nobody checked. 80 years. From 1920 to 2001, while the entire scientific community had that species filed as extinct, while conservation funding was redirected away from it, while no one in any research program thought it was worth looking for because everyone knew it was gone. 24 animals were living under a bush on a rock in the Tasman Sea. They were there the entire time. Nobody was coming. Nobody even knew they needed to look, and they were there anyway. The question that follows from that fact is deeply uncomfortable. How many other ledges are there? How many other species that we have declared gone, closed the file on, stopped protecting habitat for, stopped looking for, are actually alive right now in places we have not thought to check? The planet has a great many equivalents of Ball's Pyramid, not identical in form, but equivalent in function. Remote cliff faces, inaccessible cave systems, deep river gorges in regions with no permanent human presence, high-altitude plateaus that require serious effort to survey, oceanic seamounts that break the surface in isolated stretches of open water. Every one of them is a potential refuge for something we have given up on. Scientists also noted that several plant species found on Ball's Pyramid's ledges are not found anywhere else in the Lord Howe Island group. Some are known species with unusual distributions that have not been fully explained. Others have not been fully characterized at all. The possibility that Ball's Pyramid contains plant species found nowhere else on Earth has not been ruled out because the pyramid has not been thoroughly enough examined to rule anything out. The underwater formation around the pyramid's base has never been comprehensively surveyed either. Ball's Pyramid extends below the waterline, and what is living in the marine zone around its base is a question that has received remarkably little scientific attention given how extraordinary the above-water discoveries turned out to be. The Lord Howe Island stick insect is among the largest insects on Earth. It is 15 centimeters long. It is black, glossy, about as thick as a finger, and it moves. It is not a microscopic organism that could plausibly hide in soil chemistry or laboratory cultures. It is a large nocturnal arthropod that looks like a stick with opinions, and it hid on a rock in the Pacific Ocean for 80 years, while the scientific community filed its paperwork and redirected its funding. If something that size can be missed for that long in a place that was technically known to exist, what does that tell us about the accuracy of our extinction lists? Extinction as a concept depends on completeness of evidence. It assumes that if a species has disappeared from every location we have surveyed enough locations to draw that conclusion. Ball's Pyramid proves that assumption can be catastrophically wrong. Not slightly wrong, not wrong by a small margin, wrong in a way that means a species survives for generations in an unsurveyed location, while its entire scientific community agrees it does not exist anymore. The tree lobster is alive. The captive population is growing across 6 institutions on multiple continents. Lord Howe Island was officially declared rodent-free in 2023, with the final confirmation report published in November 2025. The path to reintroduction is open for the first time in over 100 years. A species that was dead is being brought back to the island it came from. Because 24 animals on a ledge, 90 meters up an impossible rock in the Tasman Sea, decided that a single scrubby Melaleuca bush was enough to hold on to. They held on for 80 years. Nobody was coming to help. Nobody even knew they were there. The scientific community had written them off, the file had been closed, the funding had moved on, and 24 stick insects on a ledge in the Pacific Ocean held on anyway. What that means for every species we have currently written off, for every file we have closed, for every habitat we have stopped protecting, because the thing that lived there was officially gone. That is, the question that Ball's pyramid leaves sitting in the room. The pyramid is a 562-meter-tall argument carved in basalt, jutting out of the Tasman Sea, with the answer to that question living 90 meters up its face. We were looking in the wrong places. We declared things gone before we had checked all the places they could possibly be. And the distance between extinct and undiscovered is, in some cases, exactly the length of a rope, an 11 o'clock torch, and the willingness to rappel down a sea cliff in the dark to look under a bush that nobody else thought was worth checking. The insects were always there. We just were not.